Hey everyone, it's Josh, J Ventachana Minis, Orlando. So we're back on this Z50. This is actually the RD engine, the Christmas special chrome bike. I was just told it was an 86 motor, but after I cleaned it up, I noticed that this was a polished cover, so that was a clue that it was a Christmas engine. So anyways, we went ahead and ordered, per the owner's direction, a import setup. I went with Too Fast Moto, the company that I got the head, piston, and jug from. So it's what your standard import setup comes as: a complete head, valves, everything's installed, ready to bolt on. And then you got to get your matching piston. The jugs are interchangeable across all years on the 49cc 39mm pistons, but the actual piston design itself, with the wrist pin location and the dome height, deck height of the cylinder or piston, needs to be matched to the year of the Z50. So this one is a late model Z50R. It's got the long, you call it the long rod, and you'll need to have the matching piston for the long rod. If you had a more vintage Z50 81 and below, you'd have a short connecting rod, and then you'd have to have the dome piston, the old dome they call it. So anyway, so we got everything taken off. The top end that he had was no good, so that's why we went with a new kit. It's a good opportunity to check your connecting rod. Big end, this is your small end here where your wrist pin goes through and the piston is assembled on, and you have your big end of your connecting rod here that sits on your crankshaft. That's a good time to kind of just look at your big end and see if you have any excessive play, and you can easily check that by holding your flywheel so you're not rotating and giving it some forward and backward pulls. And if the bearing's sloppy on that big end on the crankshaft, it will have some play. So, and then you also have some tolerances that are allowed for side-to-side play, but we're more concerned with is the back and forth movement of this rod, because if that has excessive wear, that messes with your clearance clearances on the piston coming into the cylinder head. And if this rod is bearing is worn out, that can run into interference issues where your piston actually will hit your valve or your cylinder head dome. So that's what we're most concerned with, is the play forward and backward on the crankshaft. So just give it a couple little gentle tugs and just kind of, you'll see what I mean. It's either pretty tight or no play whatsoever, or you'll have a lot of sloppiness, and that's where you're going to be wanting to actually tear it down and get this rebuilt, or buy a replacement kit for it. So let's go ahead and just start with the top end assembly. Take a look and kind of look at the parts that we can see. So this is our cam chain. It's got a couple sprockets in the back. This actually is driven, this chain itself is driven by the crankshaft that has some teeth on it. And then what we have is up here, you can't really see it, but there's a black pulley. That's part of the chain tensioner bolt that we find underneath here. That's your bolt, and then there's a slide rod and a lock and a spring, and that gives you tension on your adjustment for your cam chain overall tightness and tension. And then what we see down here is this metal gear that is actually part of your oil pump assembly. So if we zoom back, you got your oil pump, which is on this side of the case on your clutch cover. You got an oil pump that sits right here, and then that shaft that we see right there, that chrome shaft or rod sitting in there, runs from the oil pump over to this gear, and this chain is responsible for turning your oil pump. So if your teeth are sheared on this gear, which happens, say goodbye to your oil pressure. First thing first here is we'll clean this area off. Make sure you get all your gasket, lightly scrape it with a razor blade very gently, and get all your residual leftover gasket smoothed down. Use like rubbing alcohol to help clean off all the oil, so you got a nice work surface to put your new gasket on. You'll want to check your ring end gap and your need to get yourself a set of feeler gauges. Everyone should have a set of feeler gauges, at least at the minimum, if you're doing these engines. So you're going to want maximum end gap to be 0.35 millimeters, 0.35 millimeters, or the minimum gap 0.15 millimeters. Put our ring down so we can put our feeler gauge in it, and make sure that that gap right there is within the spec. So I'll start it and then use the top dome of the piston to evenly press it down so that you're nice and square in the bore, and then we got our gap right there. And I basically, like I said, 0.35 millimeter max, 0.15 minimum. So I'm going to go ahead with my minimum, and I'm able to put that in there, so we're good on that parameter. And then our maximum will not even go in, so we're not beyond our maximum either, so that ring is good. So both my compression rings I've spec'd out okay. I'm not really concerned about too much about the oil ring itself, but there are some specs for that too if you'd like to check that. I'm going to go ahead and install these on. I have a video, I'll give a link in the bottom summary area to how to install the rings properly. Alright, so stuff behind your rod and your bore hole, and over here with the cam chain, just put some stuff in there because we're going to be messing with the circlip, and you don't want that flying down inside the case. So first thing you do is put your one circlip in, and we're going to put one circlip in the piston on one side. Let's go and find our connecting rod. Oil up your wrist pin really well with some motor oil or assembly lube, and we'll just go ahead and press or push this in. Should slide in pretty gently. And then one other thing to note is, this has an intake, IN for intake. That always is going to point up when you install your piston. And then the other identifier is your intake valve is always a larger valve on these engines, so it's going to be the larger cutout on your piston as opposed to the small relief cut on the exhaust side. Circlip holding the piston on both sides this is like the entry point on the piston where you can start to get your circlip inserted, but your open end on your circlip needs to be away from this entry point. So you rotate it 180 degrees so that the open end is far away from this part. Okay, that way there's no less likely chances of failure and this working its way out. What we're looking at is the dowel pins that help locate the cylinder, the jug, and the cylinder head. And we have two sizes here, 4 total dowels, 2 long ones and 2 short ones. The short ones are 12 millimeter, the long ones are 14 millimeter. So the short 12 millimeter go on to the engine case. Let me get this focused on here. So the shorter ones are going to go on first, and they go on the cam chain side studs. Okay, so you can only put them on this side, but they have these holes that you're going to slide them down into. You're going to want to make sure you seat those down into the hole. A green gasket, the paper gasket that we're going to put on real quick. And that should slide over those dowels that we just put in. Careful not to tear it. Run your cam chain through it. Next thing that we need to worry about is this rubber seal, and the seal has square edges on it. I don't know if we can get it to focus here. Square edges on it. It's pretty thick, but that's the proper seal, and then that's going to go on the return oil channel here, right here. And if you have my engine box, it's easy if the engine's vertical and you're laying all these parts and then sliding the cylinder on, but since we're doing it different here, I'm going to put a little oil on the seal just to give it a chance to stick in place. so it stays there. Okay, and then next we're going to put a little oil. It's your chance to get your piston a little lubed up a little bit in your rings. And then just double check here, like I showed in the other video, how to set your rings and orient them. Just make sure your rings are in place in the right spot, because we're going to slide our cylinder down. No special tools needed for this procedure. Just gently feed the piston, clamp down your rings, squeeze them as each ring is entering into the cylinder, and it's just a slow, kind of gentle process. And you know, keep a little I like to clamp my hand like a C-clamp around the jug and the piston to keep some pressure, so it's pushing the piston in while I gently press around on the rings so that it can insert into the jug. Alright. Okay, so now we're ready to push the jug all the way down. Make sure that rubber seal is still in place like I showed you, and put your cam chain through the jug. This is not getting torqued down, this is just enough to keep it so it doesn't come back off the center case here, so I'm not even torquing that. And then you got your specialty bolt that you're going to put your roller in inside of here. And this actually has a washer, which you do need, or you'll have an oil leak. So get your aluminum washer, put that on the bolt. I'll just hand tighten this for now. Just make sure your cam chain can stretch and it's not bound up behind the stator plate, so make sure that still rolls, which we're good. They're diagonal from each other. And then we can go ahead and get our hard gasket on. It's got the insert here. Get it around your dowels. And then the other square edge rubber seal is going to go again on the lower portion here, right here in the oil return valley. Again, I'll put a little oil on it, steal some oil from the jug area, put a little oil on it so it stays in place. And then the green gasket, that's also, or the green seal, that's still a square too. Will go, because there's a couple O-rings that are green too sometimes in these kits. You want the square edge. That's gonna go, this is the stud that the oil pump feeds up into the cylinder head through this valley here. So this is your seal that helps hold the oil running in up the stud and not leaking, so that goes there. Okay, and now we're ready to put the cylinder head on. It's dowel time, and these are the 14, these are the longer of the dowels, like I said, and longer because these are a little deeper recessed holes that these are going to go in, so you need a longer dowel. So looking straight at the piston and jug, top left stud gets one dowel. Push that all the way in, and then our lower right stud gets the other dowel. So there, which it does, has a much better fit. So I'm gonna go. So this is the aftermarket head. It came all pretty much with all the covers on it. I took all the covers off, took the cam sprocket off, took the tappet covers off. Just want this thing to be as bare as possible. My little tip to you guys is on any of these heads, sometimes when you're going to go slide them in, these little rocker arm pins slide back and out of the way, and then they block the stud hole, so you can see that that's in the way, so you want to make sure you get those pushed back. Just go ahead and just push them in. Kind of just use a flathead screwdriver or something and just push them all the way back in, so that you can slide this head down over this, slide them down the studs without those interfering. Okay, so other thing is, let's get these tappets backed off. You want to have these rockers as loose as possible, that way we can rotate our cam, deload the rockers, that way we can make the adjustments when we're putting our cam chain back on. Alright, just lightly tighten that down. These bolts will get their final torque after everything else is torqued. Gasket on. These covers always have like an arrow at the, that should be the bottom part of the cover, so arrow points down. Looking straight at the cylinder head, lower left stud is the oil upfeed from the oil pump. Gets the copper washer and an acorn nut. And then I'm going to torque these down to about 9 foot-pounds, but I'm going to stage it. I'll do it probably 5 pounds crisscross, staging it. Then I'll go to about 8 pounds and then do a final 9 pound. Get the cam roller bolt, that's 7 to 10 foot-pounds. Same thing for these two bolts, these are 7 to 10 foot-pounds, so get those torqued down. Get our cam chain, get the actual drivetrain, cam shaft, valves, everything timed. This is your cam chain sprocket. That circle there is going to need to face this hatch mark on the cylinder head, and then your flywheel, you're going to want to rotate this while actually holding the chain, so we don't want that chain to feed back and bind up. To top dead center, our T-mark, and the T-mark needs to match up. There's our T-mark, needs to match up with that little line on the cylinder, or on the case. So we're lined up, and let's get our cam gear. This is why you want to keep the load off the cam, so we can rotate it. We want to make sure that these 3 holes, which are kind of like not completely exactly spaced from each other, you need to look at it and then get your cam rotated so that these holes will meet up. Alright, so that looks good. I'm still at the T mark. Now I'm going to go ahead and actually I need to unloosen my chain tension bolt down here. I got it in there tightened, so I'm going to go ahead and loosen this up as much as I can to help me get a little more stretch out of this chain. We're going to go ahead and put our bolts that take a 9mm socket in. So we're going to go ahead and hand screw these in, get it started. And if you want to, it's not a bad idea, as you could put a little blue Loctite on this area if you want to, just so those don't back themselves out ever. And these are torqued to 4 to 7 foot-pounds. Next we're going to put our cover on, cam cover, and then our other side for our cam cover. And when you're going to put this cover on, these little tabs, you want the small little tab to go in between these two. It keeps it from rotating on some cylinder. Some of these aftermarket heads don't have these, but this one does. So you're going to put your little small tab in between there. And then on this side, we're going to run our long bolt, but make sure you put a copper crush thick washer on this bolt too, okay? Just, you know, go ahead and lubricate. You know, when you're, if my tip would be, when you get these new heads, just go ahead and get your cam lobes, and this one had roller bearings in it. Get all that stuff lubed up. I'm going to do it right now, but it may be a little easier if you got it while it's in your hand and not assembled. So I'm going to go ahead and just lubricate my top end, put some oil. I'm going to do prime it anyways, but I'm going to make sure there's some oil up here on the top end. So pipe's hooked up, got my carb on. I set the valves. I'll put a link in the video how to do that, and set your spark plug gap and get all the timing all squared up. I think I showed you how to do timing. But we're going to go ahead and prime it. Use a non-impact drill, 17 millimeter, counterclockwise, about 30 seconds or so. If you're ever curious about if you're getting oil up on the top end after priming it, say you did a big bore kit and you put a high flow oil pump or replaced your pump and you're just not sure about it, pull your lower tappet cover and it should be just filled with oil. So if you put a new top end, you're gonna obviously know if you're getting oil if your tappet's filled up with oil. Okay. The other option I guess I've seen is if you undo this lower left acorn nut, pull it off, prime it, you get oil that will come out of there, but I don't mess with untorquing that. Just use your lower tappet cover. We're all squared up, got my fuel auxiliary fuel tank hooked up, oil in the crankcase. Just go ahead and crank it over. Alright guys, that's going to complete this 2-video series on this Z50RD engine refurbishment as far as the top end. Appreciate the subscriber or the video YouTube subscriber sending me his engine to work on. So hopefully you guys learned a lot about putting the top end together. Try to give you all the tips and tricks as far as getting that back together and getting you set up right to get it to fire right off for you. So please subscribe if you don't. Alright, more content to come. Thanks guys.